Hey SproutsCast, good to see you today. This is SproutsCast, Tuesday edition, story time. Look who's with me. Hi, Miss Jessica.
Hello, Mr. Good, and hello, everybody out there. It's good to see you on the video.
It's good to see you. Wasn't it good to see on Sunday? I was able to see a bunch of my friends. I was able to see a bunch of you guys out there on Sunday, and so I'm really thankful for that. And it's pretty good to see everybody, wasn't it,
was
Miss Jessica?
exciting to see everybody, and there were some hugs, even though we probably shouldn't have. Just couldn't help it after being able to see our friends after so long. It was really, really good.
Well, we miss you guys, and we're gonna be getting together more and more and more as the weeks go by. So I'm excited about that. And yeah. So what are we doing here, Miss Jessica?
Well, we are continuing our story about Jim Elliott.
We are, and I gotta say that SproutsCast Thursday edition, you gotta pay attention to Tuesday edition story time because some of the questions for the trivia time on Thursday are gonna be about Tuesday's story time. So you gotta pay attention and learn what's going on so that you can answer the questions appropriately on Thursday. Sound good?
Sounds real good.
Cool.
So with that, shall we start reading, or was there anything else that we needed to tell anybody today?
I think we're good.
We're good?
Yeah.
All right. Well, we are going to continue reading chapter 8 about Jim Elliott. We're going to start chapter 8, and it's called The Angry River. June 14, 1953. Jim Elliott sat writing by the light of a kerosene lamp. "This may become known as the season of the big flood," he wrote in his journal. Several of the older Quechua men helping with the construction of the new house for the McCaulleys had told him it was the worst flooding they had seen in 30 years. The rain had poured down without interruption for 5 days. Being from Oregon, Jim was used to rain, but nothing could have prepared him for the torrential sheets of water that now fell from the sky. It was impossible to get away from the noise of pelting rain and the thunderous roar of the swirling, flooded Atanyaku River at the bottom of the bluff. It was also impossible to go more than a few steps outside without getting soaked to the skin, and it was too wet to continue work on the McCaulleys' new house, which was painfully near completion. The construction had seemed to drag on, but now a fine-looking new home sat adjacent to Jim and Pete's hut on top of the bluff. It had been built of the best materials. It was perched on concrete piles and was clad with sturdy wood planks and had an iron roof. Between the new house and the schoolhouse, which sat about 100 yards back from the edge of the bluff, the men had also built a new medical clinic. For Nate Saint to fly in the materials for these buildings, they had to clear even more jungle and extend the length of the airstrip. The rain was pounding when Jim turned off the kerosene lamp and headed for bed. It was still pounding when he awoke the next morning and peered out of the screen window toward the river. He could barely see a thing through that deluge, but he could hear the angry roar below. The last time Jim had checked, the river was flooding high above its normal level, and its surging waters were carrying away huge trees and other vegetation that had been ripped out by their roots from along the riverbank. Jim sighed deeply. There would be no work on McCauley's new home today. Just another day of inside work. Still, before he settled down, Jim needed to check on some things outside. He slipped on a raincoat and opened the door. A wall of water was cascading off the roof, and Jim was drenched before he even reached the bottom of the steps. The first thing Jim wanted to check was the small generator shed, which housed the generator for the school and the new clinic. As he battled the rain, Jim recalled the excursion he and Pete had made 2 days before. They'd followed the trail down the river until, without warning, the riverbank fell sharply away directly in front of them. A chunk of rock and sand larger than a football field disappeared into the swollen river. The power of the swirling river had amazed Jim. By the time he returned to Shandai, he was a little worried. Since the generator shed sat on the edge of the bluff above the river, he had tied one end of a thick rope to the generator and the other end to the sturdy orange tree that grew in front of their hut. Jim didn't think that the bluff would give way, but he wasn't going to take any chances. Now, as the rain continued to beat down relentlessly, Jim wanted to make sure all was still well. Through the sheets of rain, he couldn't seem to make out the shape of the generator shed. When he touched the rope, he understood why. It was stretched taut. Jim picked up his pace, sliding his hand along the rope as he went. Suddenly, the rope disappeared over the edge of the bluff, which was now about 10 yards closer to the house than it had been. The land on which the generator shed had stood was gone, and the generator was dangling in mid-air, swinging above the angry waters of the Atanyaku River. Quickly, Jim ran back to the house to get Pete. They rounded up several Quechua men, and the group heaved on the rope until the generator was safely back on the bluff. Someone slid 2 planks of wood under the generator to act as skids, and they all dragged the generator back beside the schoolhouse, where Jim hoped it would be out of harm's way. But what about the other buildings? When they had laid the foundation for the McCauley's new house, Jim had assumed it was far enough from the edge of the bluff. Now he wasn't so sure. Cautiously, Jim made his way over to the nearly completed house. The good news was it was still standing, but the bluff had crept within 15 yards of the front door, half the distance it had originally been. There was little Jim could do but hope and pray that no more of the bluff eroded. Jim began retreating to his house to get out of the rain until he noticed with alarm that the edge of the bluff had advanced just as close to his own hut. Inside, Jim and Pete wondered out loud what might happen if the rain didn't stop in the next couple of days. Many hours of labor had gone into building the McCauley's new house. The wooden planks on the side of the building had been painstakingly overlapped and nailed in place, and the concrete had been hand-mixed and poured into forms to make the piles. The roofing iron had been flown in by Nate Saint a few sheets at a time, slung under the belly of his yellow Piper cruiser. And now, just a few days short of completion, the whole structure was in danger of being destroyed. The more they discussed it, the more Jim knew what had to be done. He just wished he didn't have to undertake such a mammoth task in the midst of the torrential rain. He and Pete had a group of Quechua workers, and were going to have to carefully tear down McCauley's new house and stack the building materials away from the edge of the bluff. When Jim told Pete what had to be done, Pete was not at all surprised. He'd already come to the same conclusion. They rounded up a work crew and began. As one group of workers pried the sheets of roofing iron and planks of siding off the house, a chain of men moved the materials to the safety of the schoolhouse. It took them 1 day to dismantle what had taken 2 months to build, but it had to be done. The building materials used to construct the house were too expensive to simply abandon and allow to be swept away by the river. The day after they dismantled the McCauley's new house, the rain stopped. This allowed Jim and Pete time to inspect the damage done by the river. The ground was so softened from the rain that during their inspection, Jim's boots disappeared 6 inches into the mud with every step. Now that the rain had stopped and the swollen river was receding, Jim privately wondered whether they had done the right thing by pulling the house down. Over the next several weeks, it continued to rain off and on, though not as heavy before, and the ground was not drying out enough to allow reconstruction of the McCauley's house. Then, on Thursday, July 30th, Jim awoke to another deluge pelting the thatched roof of the hut. As little rivulets streamed down the window screens, Jim wondered whether the jungle would ever dry. Every piece of paper in the house was damp. Jim's boots grew fresh batches of mold overnight, and Jim had been wearing the same musty-smelling clothes for over a week because the rain would not let anything dry. After breakfast, Jim and Pete worked together on their Quechua dictionary. It was hard to concentrate, but there was nothing else they could do. It was just too wet to get anything done outside or to visit people in their huts. When the two men broke at noon, Jim prepared lunch while Pete made a routine check outside the hut. Jim had just put a pot of water on the Coleman stove for coffee when Pete burst back into the living room. Pete yelled, "We've got to get out of here! The river's eating away under the bank! The house could go any time!" Jim rushed outside to see for himself. As he did so, a massive mudslide 15 feet from the hut plunged into the river with a whoosh. Pete was right. They had to get out fast. Jim began to throw their kitchen things into a large bucket. Then he stopped and thought for a moment. Kitchen things were not the most important things in the house. His language notes were. Jim grabbed a box and began emptying the contents of the living room bookshelf into it. Meanwhile, Pete was frantically throwing everything he could into boxes. Suddenly, Jim stopped. The radio. They would have to dismantle the radio. Someone would have to climb up on the roof and retrieve the aerial. But was there time? And what would Marge Saint think when she tried to reach them and there was no reply? Jim dropped what he was holding and rushed for the transmitter. He needed to get a message out to Marge while he still could. "Shandai to Shelmera! Shandai to Shelmera! Over!" he called into the microphone, hoping Marge was nearby the radio in Shelmera. Finally, the radio crackled back. "I read you, Shandai. Shelmera is standing by. Over." Jim didn't have time to say much. "Marge, bad news! The river is eating away the bluff under the hut. We are only 5 yards from the edge now. I'll try to keep you posted, but if you don't hear from me at 2 o'clock, you'll know the house is over the edge. Over." "Shelmera reading you, Jim. We'll pass the message along. God bless you, and be careful. Over and out." While Jim was on the radio, Pete had been in the torrential rain rounding up a team of helpers. None of the Indians lived as close to the edge of the bluff as the missionaries, and even if they would have to abandon their huts, it would take them only a few minutes to unhook the hammocks, collect their food baskets and spears, and flee. It wasn't that easy for the missionaries. Jim and Pete had been at Shandai almost a year and had gathered quite a collection of things. The helpers formed a line from the house to the schoolhouse along which they passed Jim and Pete's belongings. The schoolhouse was still well back from the bluff's edge and seemed to be the safest place to store their goods. Jim did his best to wrap the papers and books in plastic before handing them down the line, but he knew they were racing against time. Things did not get packed as well as he would have liked. He cringed when he saw some pages from his Quechua dictionary go toppling into the mud. One of the helpers quickly picked the mud-covered paper up and shoved it back into the box. The McCauleys had stored 11 barrels of clothes and household items in Jim and Pete's house. Jim laid each barrel on its side and rolled it to the top of the stairs where he let it go. The Indian helpers then rolled the barrels into the jungle and stacked them. It was exhausting work, and by the time Jim and Pete started prying the split lengths of bamboo off the walls of their hut, the Indians had little energy left to carry the loads to safety. Despite their exhaustion, Jim and Pete had more work to do. Every item they lost now would have to be replaced later, costing both time and money. "Get out! Get out! The Indians suddenly yelled as they dropped the boards they were hauling and fled to the jungle. Jim, who had just unscrewed a cupboard from the wall, caught the panic in their voices. If men who had lived all their lives on this ground said it was time to leave, it was time to leave. Jim stuffed the screwdriver into his belt and bolted for the door. What was left would have to be abandoned. Jim kept running until he reached the edge of the clearing. He heard a massive thud behind him. He looked just in time to see his house roll slowly onto its side and disappear over the bluff into the raging river below. "That won't be the end of it!" yelled Pete grimly from his perch on the schoolhouse roof. "I think we should get out of here. It might all go in the river." "But what about the clinic?" asked Jim, unable to imagine abandoning the newest building to the swollen river. "We don't have time!" Pete yelled back. Jim had an idea. "It's not that big. How about we put a rope around it and drag it away from the edge? We could use some planks from our house as skids." "It's top heavy," Pete called back. Jim was thinking fast. He hated to lose the new building, especially the thatched roof. With so many people living around Shandai, the special fronds used for the roof thatch were in short supply. "We could tip the building on its side and drag the roof off to safety," he suggested uselessly, wiping the rain out of his eyes with a sodden handkerchief. "It's worth a try," Pete replied, "but we better move fast." Within 10 minutes, Jim had it organized. On the count of 3, 10 men pushed on the side of the clinic. The building toppled over dangerously close to the edge of the bluff. "I'll go around back and tie the rope to the roof," Jim told Pete. Jim cautiously made his way around the toppled building. As he bent over and began tying the rope to the thatched roof, the ground around him groaned, then suddenly fell away into the river. Jim found himself balancing on a thin finger of earth that jutted out from under the building. He grabbed the rope to steady himself. "He's dead!" yelled one of the Indians. "No, I'm alive!" he called back, and then instructed, "Get me a machete!" Jim held on desperately to the roof, his heart thumping audibly as he waited. At any moment, that piece of ground he was balanced on could dive into the raging river, taking him with it. The building itself now balanced precariously on the edge of the bluff. Jim had no way to squeeze back around the clinic. His only escape route was through the roof. After what seemed like an eternity, Jim heard a rustle and then saw the gleaming blade of a machete poking through the thatched roof. He grabbed it and pulled it all the way through, flipped it around and grasped it by the handle. Then, with frantic swings, he hacked a hole in the roof. As quickly as he could clamber through the hole and along the wall of the overturned clinic to the door, through which he climbed to safety. As Jim emerged from the clinic building, the cheer went up from the Indians. "Let's get out of here!" Jim yelled as he ran toward the jungle once again. Somewhere along the way, Jim's shoes slipped off in the gooey mud. Jim was vaguely aware they were gone, but he did not have the energy to reach down and pull them free. He continued on barefoot. About 50 yards further, Jim reached the place where some of their belongings and the McCauley's barrels had been dumped. The whole scene reminded him of the aftermath of a tornado. Jim sat down heavily on one of the barrels, noticing with surprise that his feet were bleeding. Pete sank down beside him. 10 minutes later, a roar shook the jungle. It could mean only one thing: the clinic had gone over the edge. A chill ran down Jim's spine. What if more of the ground underneath them was being eaten away by the river? Jim looked around. He was surrounded by towering trees with huge roots that had been anchored there for 100 years or more. Yet Jim had seen trees bigger than these tossed like twigs down into the swollen river. As difficult as it was to face, he had a strong feeling they should move everything farther away from the hungry river. Worse still, Jim began to fear for the schoolhouse and all the equipment and building materials now stored in it. He discussed his fears with Pete, who admitted he had the same fears. Jim and Pete asked the Indians to help them move all their things another 50 yards into the jungle. As they began tearing apart the schoolhouse, Jim posted one of the Indians near the edge of the bluff to stand watch. He gave strict instructions for the man to yell as soon as it got too dangerous to keep stripping the school. 6 hours later, at 3 o'clock in the morning, all of their equipment and building materials were safely stowed far from the raging current. Jim and Pete gratefully accepted the invitation of one of their Indian helpers to stay in his hut for the night. Jim was asleep in seconds, more exhausted than he'd been in his entire life. At 5 a.m., Jim was awakened by shouting. He pulled off the damp blanket he'd been sleeping under. As he tried to stand, he winced with pain from his swollen, cut feet. He hobbled outside to see what the frantic shouting was all about. Pete awoke too and followed Jim outside. The two men at Valencio, one of their helpers who was running through the jungle at breakneck speed. "It's gone!" he yelled, breathing heavily and beckoning for the two missionaries to follow him. Jim was wondering what was gone as he limped along behind Valencio. When the Indian stopped abruptly and pointed, Jim could see for himself what was gone. The land where the schoolhouse, playing field, and part of the airstrip had been was gone, swallowed by the river. Jim turned away. He couldn't bear to look. A whole year's work had been washed away. He reached out and put his hand on Pete's shoulder. The two men stood in silence. There was nothing to say. The mission station at Shandai was no more. And that is where we're going to leave it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed that. It was a little bit more exciting than some of the chapters that we've read so far. Make sure you go back and listen carefully because we'll try and pick some questions out for you. So, now what we're going to do, believe it or not, I remembered my craft. So we are going to do our craft now. We're going to move the table forward here real quick. So give me just a second. I can scoot forward too if I need to, if you think that'd be better. Okay, get this out of the way. And, all right, I got everything here. So what we're going to make is a glowworm, or a glow bug, I guess would be a better way to put it. So what you need is one empty water bottle with the lid. You need a Sharpie. You need some glue. You need 4 pipe cleaners. If you don't know what a pipe cleaner is, it's fuzzy wire. That's what it is. 4 pipe cleaners. You can use whatever color you decide you want. I'm using black because that's what I have. You need glow sticks. You can get those at Walmart or Dollar Tree for really, really cheap. And if you have them, you don't have to have them. This is just an option. You need some googly eyes. So that's what these are. I've got 2 googly eyes. If you don't have googly eyes, that's okay. You can use your Sharpie. So here's what you want to do. You want to take your water bottle and you are going to glue the eyes or draw the eyes on to the water bottle cap. So I'm going to do that real quick. I'm going to put some glue on here. I'm going to put it on a little bit thicker than I normally would just because I want to make sure they stick. So there's the eyeballs on there. That's the head of your glow bug. There's his eyes. And then you can take your Sharpie if you're not using it already and you can draw a little smiley face or an angry face or whatever kind of face you want your glow bug to have. Mine is going to have a smiley face. So there's a little glow bug face. Alright? So then, we put that back on so my glue doesn't dry. You are going to take, make sure that doesn't roll off. You're going to take one of your pipe cleaners and you're going to wrap it around the bottle. You're going to start on the top so his eyes are facing the right way. You're going to start on the top. You're going to get it about half and half on each side. You want the pipe cleaner to be the same length and then in the middle of his body. What you're going to do is you're going to twist it around 2 times so that it stays on there. And those are going to be some of his legs. So then you can bend them into the position that you want them to be in to look like legs. Now bugs have how many legs? 6 legs. So we're going to use 2 more pipe cleaners and we're going to do the exact same thing. You're going to go back a little bit farther. You're going to wrap it around. You're going to get it even so that his legs are the same size. And you're going to twist it 2 times. And there's his other legs. And you're going to get the last one. You're going to space them out. So here's the next one. You're going to get it on there, wrap it around the water bottle, make it about the same length, get him even so he's not lopsided. Twist it twice. And there's his legs. And then, like I said, you can bend them. You could probably keep them up. You might have to adjust them a little bit so that he actually stands up and doesn't fall over. Let me grab my other pipe cleaner. It fell on the floor. So this one is going to go around the neck of the bottle. And this is going to be his antennas. So you want to get them even as well. You want them to be the same length. Just like that. And you're going to twist it a couple of times so that it stays on there. And then we're going to make curls with it. So you're just going to twist it around your finger. And then you can do that. And you can do it however you want it. You can twist them around in circles, however you want it. But there's your little bug's antenna and his legs and his face. Now what you're going to do is you're going to get your glow sticks. And you don't have to do this right away. You could do it at night if you want to. But you break your light sticks and you shake them up. And you stick them in your water bottle. In fact, you could probably even leave water in there, I suppose, if you wanted to, and it might make the reflections of the glow sticks kind of shimmer a little bit. So then, as long as the glow sticks are glowing, your bug will glow at night. You can put whatever different colors you want in there. Mine are red. It's hard to see. If we could turn the lights out, you'd probably see them glowing a little bit better, but then you wouldn't. It might mess with the cameras. But there's you a little glow bug. And you can have him almost like a little nightlight in your room for a little while. So hopefully you guys will be able to do that. It's an empty water bottle. You need some googly eyes and a Sharpie, but you don't have to have the googly eyes. You can just use Sharpie and draw his eyes on. Some glue, 4 pipe cleaners, and the lights. And that's all that you need to make yourself a little glow bug. You can design him however you want and give him whatever face you want. And I look forward to hearing from you guys, seeing if you like that or not. Make sure you tune in on, let's see, this is Tuesday, so our next SproutsCast will be on Thursday. So make sure you guys are all here on Thursday to answer questions about our story. Hope you guys have a great evening.